The Richard and Judy Book Club Autumn Collection, exclusive to WHSmith.
In this edition of the Book Club, a prolific writer with a story that at one time could touch us all.
That's really what the book is about for me. It's very much a book about love, and not just romantic love, but maternal love. That kind of strength of love to really break through any barriers, even something as insurmountable as Alzheimer's.
Rowan Coleman joins us to chat about The Memory Book, a story of trying to hang on to the past when your memories are fading.
Saturday the 13th of August 2011, our wedding. This is a tiny piece of Duchess satin my wedding dress was made from. I cut it from the hem while it will never be missed.
Looking for a good book? Don't know which page to turn to? Richard and Judy can help. Check out the book club exclusive to WHSmith.
This week's book, The Memory Book, deals with an incredibly raw issue for many of us. What happens when your memories start to fade?
Author Rowan Coleman is no stranger to writing. After years of secretly wanting to write and tackling dyslexia, her first novel was published over a decade ago.
In a moment, we'll meet Rowan, but first, a little bit more on her career in books.
I get ideas for books from literally everywhere. Everywhere I go, walking down the street, looking out of the window this morning, I saw an interesting building that I'd really like to set a scene of a novel in one day. Things that I hear, people that I meet. One of the ideas for the memory book came from a meeting with a couple in a supermarket. And the lady was standing by the till looking a bit lost and anxious. And I asked her if she was okay, and she just wasn't really sure if she was okay or where she was. But she knew that her husband was coming back for her. So I waited with her until her husband came back, and I could just see the love between them, even though she was caught up in the thralls of dementia, that they still had this love for each other, and it just transcended everything else. And that's really one of the places I got the idea for the memory book from. I'm Rowan Coleman, and I'm the author of the memory book. I am a big thinker before I start a novel. I like to think for a long time, usually sitting down with a cup of tea or walking my dog. I think it's really important, actually. I think thinking time is just as important as writing time, to try and get the idea into your head and try and get to know the world that you're about to create. I'm always a bit nervous before I start writing, but it is also very exciting as well, and I really love the blank page before you put down those first words. Don't love it so much about a third of the way in where it starts to get difficult. Up until that point, very exciting.
Now, the memory book, being straight and straightforward, deals with Alzheimer's in a very peculiar way. It deals with very early onset Alzheimer's, where a young woman who's got everything going for her, she's got a happy marriage, she's got 2 lovely children. It is discovered that she has early onset Alzheimer's, and she's only in her 40s, and she's losing everything. Ostensibly a pretty depressing subject to write about, but actually this book is full of fun and love and great sadness. It is a real tearjerker, obviously, but it is also funny and amusing and lovely. Why did you get the idea to have a young woman with Alzheimer's as opposed to a very elderly woman?
I think the idea really to make Claire in her 40s was I wanted her to be really relatable to a wide audience. And I think Alzheimer's can be a very isolating disease and a lonely one for the person who's living with it. And I just felt that by making her a little bit younger, not hugely much younger than people who suffer from early onset Alzheimer's, it would widen out the horizons of all the experiences that she was having and make the emotions perhaps a little bit more immediate. And I think people who are living with this disease, the families and the individuals who are living with it, their experience is exactly the same. But I think it's easy for people from the outside to kind of try and ignore it and shy away from it and not really look at the experiences that people are going through.
I agree with you. If you look at somebody who's elderly with Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, like my own mother who died recently, partly of that, to some extent you can't help it. Part of you says, well, it's because they're old. It's because they're old, and it's part of being old. But when you put that condition in the mind and body of a relatively young woman, it really confronts you with what it's really like, you know. And that's what I think, that's one of the great powerful sort of modes of the book. Just describe this diary that she keeps, hence the title, The Memory Book, and its function for her.
Well, she's recommended to write down all of her fondest memories as a way to help her keep her mind active as part of therapy. And also it becomes a legacy to leave behind to her family and her children. And it becomes more than just her memory book, it becomes her family's memory book. So Claire writes in her own memories, and also her older daughter writes in her memories, her husband and her mother. So it really becomes a kind of a patchwork that builds up a picture of her life and the kind of person that she is.
It's a really good analogy. It is like a patchwork quilt, isn't it?
Yeah.
That everybody sews a square into. And as happens with older people, just with her, she finds herself having great days where she can go to the shops, she can have proper conversations, she remembers things, and then the very next day she doesn't even remember the house that she lives in the street. She comes back to her street and doesn't know where she lives. And how much of this did you research, and how much do you know anyway from perhaps direct experience?
I did a lot of research. I think it was really important to try and get it right. And everything that happens to Claire is possible. It does happen to people in their 40s. It's really rare, but it does happen. And so I did a lot of kind of factual research. I read a lot first-hand accounts from people living with dementia, which was really important because I think the inner experience of living with dementia as opposed to the external one that everyone else sees is very different. You know, your thought process, your intellect, your communication skills can all be going on internally, but you may lose the ability to express that outwardly. So that was very important for me to get Claire's voice right. And also, my mum was really ill a few years ago.
With dementia?
Well, we thought so. I mean, she was just about 70, and it was mimicking all of the symptoms of dementia, and it was frightening, terrible time, because she was extremely scared and we were scared, and there was this widening gulf between us.
What happened? Did she, I mean, I'm sorry I don't mean to be intrusive, but did she recover from this? Was it not Alzheimer's?
It wasn't, no. In the end, we've discovered, almost by chance actually, that she had a cyst in her brain filled with fluid, and it was altering her function and altering her memory and her ability to communicate with us.
Because I must admit, one of the great things about this book is, and a lot of the people who have read it and have written tributes to it, is that it isn't depressing. It's sad, as I said before. Of course it's sad. Somebody, you know, you can't reverse Alzheimer's. Somebody is losing their whole life. But because of her nature, Claire's nature, and her, she manages to grip onto life and to her inner self really, really strongly, doesn't she?
Yeah.
You never forget who she is,
No.
or what she wants, or what she's like. She's quite bohemian. She's kind of, you know, she's always done her own thing and all the rest of it. Well, her oldest daughter, Caitlin, is very aware of that in her mother and reflects it. And I think what you do is, and it's very positive, and I would have thought for anyone who's reading it with somebody like that in the family, is actually you create a kind of net of love, actually. You show that it's possible to create love in a family which kind of holds her up and binds her. And they do love her, don't they, enormously?
Oh, very much so. And she loves them.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what the book is about for me. It's very much a book about love, and not just romantic love, but maternal love. Yeah. And that kind of the strength of love to really break through any barriers, even something as insurmountable as Alzheimer's.
Yes.
You know, that you can forget who somebody is, but I think your heart remembers, and that's really what I think.
And that's what comes through.
But there is a terrible challenge for her wonderful husband, her fantastic husband, who I admire so much in the way you write him, and that is that she ends up, it would appear, to be embarking on an affair with another man, which is just another tremendous load for, it's Greg, isn't it, her husband?
Yes, Greg.
To take on. What made you introduce that as a storyline? Because that's really challenging.
Well, I think what I wanted for Claire was for her to be her own person, and also to show how isolating and how changed a disease like dementia can make you feel. And it's almost as if the world that you knew and the people that you loved and trusted aren't actually your world anymore. And so she feels, a lot of the time, she feels quite alone. And she just happens to meet somebody when she's out and actually a bit lost.
And vulnerable.
But
vulnerable.
But
yeah.
that, of course, leads to an enormous twist, which we find
Oh,
out
we will
later
not
in the
give away,
book.
no.
But one of the things it does illustrate, I think, that particular relationship in her head, and also her relationship with Greg, her husband, is the fact that despite what's happening to her, she's still romantically and sexually aware.
Yeah.
That those things, as part of her as a young woman, only in her 40s, are still very much there. So she isn't fading into old age at all. She
Yeah.
still remains herself
Yeah.
in her 40s with her same things. And of course, and the character of Ruth, her mother, I love, because she's seen it all before, because this is a hereditary thing. Claire has inherited this from her father, so Ruth has seen it all before. I think it's a lovely book, and I think it's very encouraging book. It's very sad. In the end, well, you don't go quite to the end, but we all know what's going to happen. But in the end, you see it as a kind of uplifting, hopeful end.
I think so. For me, it is a hopeful end, and I think it's all about Claire and all about the legacy that she leaves behind and for her family. And I think it's about living in the moment and just being aware of the people that you love and making sure that you hug them really tight and tell them that you love them.
Living in the present, however hazy it may be.
Yeah.
It's very much a parable, and we know from survey after survey done in recent years, since dementia has emerged as the great ogre that awaits so many people at the end of their lives, has writing it and researching it left you feeling more comfortable about the possibility of you developing dementia when you become old, or even earlier than that?
I think I'm pretty optimistic about the future for dementia sufferers. I think that there is a will and a impetus to try and improve treatments. I don't know if there will be a cure in my lifetime, but there's definitely a will to improve treatment. And I think, we're all living to be a lot older, so it is kind of a fact of life that we have to adjust to.
Well, we've used various words like sad and uplifting, but for me, I think the word I'd use would be tender. It's a very tender book, a very tenderly told story, and it's a joy to read. Many congratulations.
Thanks.
So that's Rowan Coleman's wonderful novel, The Memory Book.
Tell us what you've been reading too and be part of the book club. Find us at home at whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy.
A book I've read recently, which I really enjoyed, was Saturday by Ian McEwan. It was very different to what I was expecting. It was different to anything else I'd read by him, but I really enjoyed it. It was fairly slow moving, but it was very interesting. The setting, it was in London, and I like reading about places that I knew. It was also had quite an unexpected ending. You really didn't know what was going to happen next. It could have gone in any direction on any page.
I enjoyed reading I'm Your Man, The Life of Leonard Cohen by Sylvie Simmons. And Sylvie Simmons is a female writer, and she wrote for magazines like Sounds, Mojo. She's somebody I followed because she was a female writer, and following music, I was just like, that's brilliant. And her writings have always been really interesting, and I always thought I really want to be like her. And it's a wonderful read because she's actually gone out there and she's actually spoken to him, and she's spoken to the people that he was actually. I haven't really sort of read a book before where they've actually sort of explored relationships like with people like Janis Joplin. Really interesting read, and it's very long, but it's worth the commitment.
The Memory Book, another great read in the collection. But don't just take our word for it. We'd love to hear your comments and reviews too on Twitter and Facebook. Get in touch via our website.
I mean, she really gets to grips, doesn't she, with one of the great modern fears, dementia. She goes straight to the heart of it and illuminates it so sharply by actually making the person who's struggling with this terrible affliction a young woman, a relatively young woman, I mean, in her 40s. What I really liked, particularly in the first half, is how she writes about this early onset dementia almost in a descriptive way, as if she's writing about a flickering light bulb. Because sometimes She can remember where she is, she remembers where she lives, she knows exactly what happened that day and the day before and the day before that. And the next day she's walking home from the shops and she forgets which house she lives in on the street, which the day before she knew. And the next day she'll know. This flickering, this incessant flickering that gradually gets worse and worse. I thought that was beautifully drawn.
Terrifying, and also because she's got the responsibility of not just an 18-year-old daughter, but also a very small one, who's only about 3 or 4 at the time. You know, anybody knows how they feel about a toddler running out onto the street or running away from you if you're on the street shopping or whatever, and she never knows whether she'll be able to find her or not. Right? It's really, but I have to say that it's not depressing. It is not by any means a depressing book. It's dealing with a very heartbreaking subject, but at the same time, the amount of love that is expressed through the family makes it very caring, very tender. And also Claire, although we know she's suffering from Alzheimer's and we know that it can only get worse, there is no cure, we know all that, but the way she hangs on to her inner self, even when she forgets where she lives, where she forgets who that person is, she can't remember this, she can't remember that, the way she knows who she actually is in her head is very... I think it's very supportive, and it's very interesting to read.
And you use the word tender there, and there's some very tender scenes between her and her youngest child, you know, where actually she becomes a little girl with her, and they kind of communicate and interrelate on that level, almost as 2 little girls together. It's very sweet.
And also the relationship with her husband Greg, although she is fast forgetting that he is her husband. In fact, she forgets that Greg is her husband more quickly than she forgets that her children are hers or anything, which is distressing and heartbreaking for him because he loves her very much. But nevertheless, they find a way, and the author finds a way of continuing that love and making you realise as the reader what's actually going on. It's very good.
Coming up next on the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to WHSmith.
Now, we're staying in London, but it's a very different scene. In 1727.
He woke to find a cold blade pressed to his throat. They gagged him and bound his wrists before he had the wit to cry out, dragged him so hard from the bed to his knees that the floorboards split and buckled with the force.
The appalling horrors of London's notorious debtors' prison, which was called the Marshalsea Jail. It's next on the Book Club as we meet Antonia Hodgson, somebody who enjoys reading 18th century murder confessions in the British Library. And boy, does that show.
Join us and Antonia next time on the Book Club.
Get in touch with the Book Club. whsmith.co.uk/Richard and Judy. Don't forget you can download each and every book via Kobo for your e-reader or your smartphone via the free Kobo app.